Hello, and thank you for joining me for this month's painting tutorial. This month we're going to be painting a landscape with a lighthouse that's reflected in a pool. So we have several difficult elements to work on this month. Painting a sky that looks the same above and below, painting a man-made structure that looks the same above and below, and then painting something in one-point perspective like this walkway is. Then of course we'll also have to combine these really tight, realistic, very straight formations with loose grass shapes, trees, and those clouds. So let's go ahead and get started. I've laid out my watercolor paper. I've stretched it by soaking it for 10 minutes, putting it down on a piece of 1/4 inch plyboard, and then stapling around the outside about a 1/4 inch from the edge. Then after that is dry, I like to tape over the top with masking tape, and that's just so when the painting is finished I can peel it up and have a nice clean border. Then I used an HB pencil, it's a regular school pencil, and I drew the picture using a ruler to help lay out the very straight formations here and here. Then before I start to paint, I'm going to use some Frisket film to protect the lighthouse. The black stripes would obviously be fine, but I want those light stripes, the white ones, to be nice and clean throughout. So I'm going to use some Frisket film. Just choose a scrap big enough for the purpose. Lay it down, and if you press, you can see the pencil lines through there. Just trace that with a pencil, cut it out, and then you have your little pieces. So I've already cut those out. Then I need to just peel them off like a sticker. Since these are so short, I can just peel the whole thing. And I purposely cut them a little bit small. That's so I can use some masking fluid and go over the top to make it extra precise around the edges. Just tamp that down nice and tightly so the paint doesn't get underneath. Do that the same for the younger, or do the same thing for the lower reflection. And then, like I said, I like to use masking fluid that comes in a fine line bottle like this. You can just squeeze out, take out the little stopper here, and then I will trace around the outer edge and those more delicate features at the top using that masking fluid, because it can do the finer shapes a little bit better. It'll also help to protect the edges so that the paint won't get underneath, hopefully. Of course, it always seems to. No matter what you do, sometimes it just does. But this should help. And then I don't have to take so much time with the Frisket film. So if you just purposely make that a little bit smaller, ignore the really fiddly shapes and go for the larger shapes, then you sort of get the best of both worlds with those two masking elements. Then the only thing you need to do is wait for it to dry. It should only take a couple minutes, and then we'll be ready to move forward and paint. So I'm going to put the masking fluid around the edge of this one as well, and I'll protect the front of this house, which you can see here is bright white, and then we'll move forward to the painting. Okay, that Frisket film is all dry, and before I start painting I wanted to point out too that I also went ahead with my Frisket, or my masking fluid, and I made some of these little tiny grass blades that are standing out like white lines against the darkness. So that's something I failed to mention before. Now we're all ready. And I'm going to paint that sky with a flat brush. So I have here a 1-inch flat. I'm going to get it wet, and then I'm going to use a scrap of watercolor paper with a hole punched out of it and mix up a color and match it to that specific blue before I paint it to my paper. So let me just get a few blues on my sheet here. I've got some Antwerp and some Prussian blue, a little cerulean, and that sky is looking a little purple too, so I'm actually going to mix up a little bit of purple there too. There's my first shot. It's pretty close. Might look a little too dark. You want an interesting sky, and the sky really does do wonders for reflecting the mood. So I try to take extra care to make sure that I have the right blue mixed up. Ah, that's it. Okay, so now we have the problem of these clouds. It's good that we have a reference material to abide by, because that way we can't go too far wrong if we just pay attention to the reference material. If we didn't have that, we'd have to make it up here and then do our best to copy what we see again. Otherwise it's not going to look like a reflection. So I'm going to give myself a break and just lightly draw, really lightly draw, some of the larger shapes of these clouds with my pencil. And I see that my oh, what's this called? This thing, this lighthouse sticks up more into the sky in my picture than it does in the reference material, so that's going to throw me off a little bit. But if I realize that and just account for it, I should still be okay. I mean, if I just adapt myself to that change. Whew, it's hard to talk and draw when you're trying to copy kind of complex shapes. There's that little bit, and then it goes off about like this. Normally I'm not too fussy about my clouds, and I just sort of let them do what they want to do. But in this case, I do want it to look like a reflection, so I am going to take those extra pains. Okay. So that might be all I want to do. And then I'm going to go in with my dark blue at the top here and start to, on a dry canvas or dry sheet of paper, just painting around those shapes. And this is really a tricky technique. It's tricky because you're going to lose the control on those hard edges if you spray your paper and get it wet first. So you really need to paint dry. But when you paint dry and your edges start to dry, and then you don't have a really cohesive, polished looking sky, it looks like someone painted it badly and they let their color dry and then didn't really know what to do about it. So you just sort of have to go quickly and make sure that you continually change your color. As you go down, it should get lighter. So here I'm changing to more cerulean. And that can be difficult too, because if you need to stop and keep color checking as you go, then that's going to make things more difficult. And, what I guess I'm saying is just kind of expect this to be difficult, and you might need to give yourself a couple of different rounds. You know, you might need to start and finish it. You might need to try it a couple of times before you're done with a sky that you're really proud of, because it's just tough. It's tougher than you're probably expecting. Look for the negative shapes and try to match those. So in this case, I'm just trying to find the blue shapes that connect all of these little fiddly clouds, and I'm putting them in with the corner of my brush. And don't worry too much if it's not exactly the same as what you see, because it's never going to be. And that's one of the strengths of painting too. Okay, you don't want it to be exactly the same. It's your painting, so you want it to reflect you. And be something that no one else could have painted. So don't fuss over things that don't need to be fussed over. Clouds don't need to be fussed over. You just, in this case, I'm trying to teach you this fussy technique. Okay, don't paint over all of these white specks, these little white clouds that you see around in this area, because they're important to the composition. These draw the eye over to the right, and if you don't have them, there's going to be nothing but a big blue sea of blank boringness. So that's not what you want. But down here, the sky gets a whole lot lighter, so I'm just going to wash out my brush and go right over the top like this. Still painting in some of those fiddly little shapes in the clouds. So inside the clouds we see some little broken blue shapes. And that makes it interesting. But then, see here, it started to dry on me, so I'm just going to try to wash out that color and join it with my new color. And go over only as much as I want that cloud to be. That's good. And then this down here is really, really light, and I'm just going to go right over the top of those buildings to bring it all the way down. I almost see a yellow in there. So I'll go in with a little bit of the orange at the bottom here. And we'll see if that shows up at all. Let's see. Gotta be really careful, because if I just add a straight yellow into that blue, you know what's going to happen. It's going to make a weird green that doesn't really belong. So I'm going to go in fairly heavy with the yellow and then add some pink around it. And then just, you have to let it rest at some point and let the color do its thing. Got to get back up in here before this sky completely dries. Oh no, it's pretty dry. Pretty dry, pretty dry. But I can wash it down and make this side match the other. Okay, soften that edge. Ugh, it's gonna bleed together here. It's too slow. Well, at least you know what happens when you have wet meat dry. It will bleed. This is going to bleed right here when it dries. And it can be a painting ruiner if you don't have any bleeds anywhere else, because then it looks like a mistake. So you just have to make the decision at that point whether you want to keep the painting as it is or start afresh. I've gone both ways. So it's just a decision that you have to make for each painting. Now I'm gonna add that bit of yellow. over here so that it looks like it matches. And that bit of pink. So this is a magenta, but it's really, really watered down. Then in the clouds themselves, you can see some pretty intense gold. So you can go ahead and paint that on too. Whew, just makes it that much more complicated, because that gold can get out of control and it can bleed and make a huge mess too. But you want it to look like the picture, so we've got to try. If you're going to go for it, just go for it. Got some golden edges. Alright. Then I'm going to rinse out my brush, get a little bit of that magenta on there again. Really, really light. So now I've got this purple and I'm going to outline my yellow. And go in with this purpley color for the rest of the clouds. So it's just what I see on the board. It's just what I see on my reference material. And you've got to work fast or those yellows are all going to dry and they won't blend. So be fast, be bold. And then over here, I'm just going to let it wash out. And the colors are going to blend together and soften. Yeah, they're just pretty soft edges over here where the clouds are sort of drifting back. Boy, clouds are just, they're hard to paint. So if your clouds look terrible, don't even worry about it. Just try again. And there's different approaches to take depending on what kind of clouds they are, and the sky is always changing. There's 10,000 ways to paint a sky, so this approach doesn't work for you, try your own variation on it. You know, try painting on a slightly white canvas or a slightly white board that's dry in some spots and not in everywhere. Whew, boy, it's just tough. Here's that bleed that I was talking about. This is distracting, so I'm gonna try to wash over it. Alright, that's the basics. Now we have to do the same thing down here in the reflection. So I've got my pencil lines. I know I have to go dark here at the bottom. I have to work fast again. takes a lot of concentration and a lot of looking back and forth, so if I don't say much, that's why. Okay. Making some of those little shapes with the corner of the brush. And then you can add the yellows the same way. Then once that's done, you're going to let it dry, and I'll come back to you when it's time to move on. So I'll just finish up the sky work that same way. I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Okay, when the sky is dry, you can go ahead and move down to the foreground, and well, actually we can go ahead and take off this masking fluid and frisket foam, and then we can start to work up everything else at the same time. So take that off. Very good. Nothing smeared into it, that one. All right. So that's great. And then let's go ahead and work from back to front like always. So remember how you're going to do the sky first, because that's the farthest in the background, and then you layer and layer and layer, ending with the elements in the very foreground. So in this case, we're going to have the lighthouse and the trees. So because the trees are on top of the lighthouse, it's good to have at least the portion of the lighthouse that's behind the trees done first. So if you want to keep these lines really nice and straight, and I think that we do, get some tape and just tape the edges. You only need the very edge, so you can even just rip your tape in half and use the other side for the other side of your lighthouse. Excellent. I can do that with the reflection as well. Then I'm going to use a round squirrel brush here and put in the darks of the lighthouse. Actually, I'm going to put in the shadows on the white part first. So I'm just mixing up a blue, and I see the same colors on the white of the lighthouse that I do in the sky. So we have some blues here. And to make that as smooth as possible, I'm just going to wash over the whole thing. leaving an edge on the highlight side so it has more dimension. But I'm going to go in with one color, and then while it's still wet, I'm going to bring down even another more purpley blue and let those sort of fade together. And then in the highlight, I see just a hint of that magenta, so I'll go in there with that. It's very lovely. And that's all I'm going to do to that one. I'll do the same thing in the reflection. So I still have a highlight side and a shadow side in the reflection. I want them to be different, so I'm going in plenty dark, and then in the highlight I'll drop in some of that magenta. It's even kind of a yellowy, mustardy color up here too. Make sure that your lighthouse goes plenty down into the foliage area, and then we're just going to let that dry. Okay, when the highlight side is dry, then you can go ahead and add those really intense darks. So I'm going in with the straight Payne's gray here. And then you just need to be a little bit careful. Start on the dark side and just try to match that angle. I still want there to be a slight indication of a lighter side. So what I'll do is I'll just wipe all the way over, but then I'm going to blot out the highlight. Like that. That looks just a little crooked. Let me straighten it. And the top. The top I'm actually going to have to peel the tape down because it starts to get a different shape. So it has these little delicate edges that flare out. And then flare out even more up here. So just take your time with that round squirrel brush. Make those little things happen. Then for these lines, I'm going to turn my board because you have more control going laterally. So back and forth, and then just whoop, Get lots of paint off, and then just do a few of those little lines going up. Not all of them that you see. Just a few. Then you have this little fence thing. Okay. Then when you peel the tape off, you have that nice crisp edge. So it did its job very well. And you can do the same thing on the bottom. You might have to peel the tape down again to do that top stripe. So I'm just going to finish this other black stripe and the top the same way that I did up here, and let it dry and come back. Okay, I'm going to focus in on the top now, because we're going to focus on adding these bushes and the trees. So for this work, I like to use a round brush with kind of short bristles like this. And I'm going to mix up an olive green, so it's got some brown in it, some yellow, some blue. All together it makes an olive, and it needs to be dark enough that it's going to stay nice and dark even after drying. And remember that watercolors always dry about 2 to 3 shades lighter than you put them down. So they can be really tricky that way. But then we're going to go in, keep the reference material nice and close, and then just blot, blot, blot these little tufts of pine bristles. Okay, so I'm just taking my time. It's fast, but it shouldn't be sloppy. You're trying to make some interesting shapes here. And then you have these kind of cool trees in the background as well. They're a little bit smaller. And as you work, make sure that you always add at least 2 or 3 colors and let them mix together on the page. So here I'm going in with some blue, just dropping in that blue in some of those wet areas. Take it back to that olive green color for up here. And if you want, you can protect the edge of the lighthouse. Make sure that it doesn't get any paint on it. Just protect it with a little piece of tape. See how that allows me to just really freely go right over the top. And you're keeping that reference material close, because if that's an eye-pleasing composition, then you want to use the same thing for your painting. So you want to look for the large shapes and try to put them down the same way. And it just gets really dark down here, right by the fence. And I have just a few little tiny little tree trunks. I'm going to get a rigger brush. And those have the long bristles and they make nice, really fine points. I'm going to get my rigger, fold up with some really dark color, and then do a couple of test swaths. That one's not coming to a fine enough point. Let's see if I have another one. Very good. And with my rigger, I'm just going to fill in a few of these tree branches, one stroke. See how well that works? All of a sudden, we have trees. It's just that easy. So those trees look fabulous. Let's do the same thing on this side. Get that same brush with really the same color. And here we're going to go over the top of our lighthouse. So I'm just fluffing about where I see the bristles on my reference material. Just filling in some of that interesting texture. And down here, some of that goes in front, right about there. And then I added the dark roof of this house. And I have some grasses, so I'm going to use my rigger again and shoot straight up for some of those. Kind of like a scrubby weed back here, I'm not sure. They look like this. And then I have another tree, really similar to the ones I already did, so I'm just going to do it the same way. Not too much paint on the brush, otherwise it won't make that interesting texture. It'll just make big blobs. And then there's another one right over here. And we have these big, tall, Dr. Seussy looking trees. I'm going to add just a little bit more yellow to my paint. You probably can't even tell the difference. But these look like little tree umbrellas. Kind of round, and they're all standing in a row like so many brooms. And then they have a few different layers. So there's this top layer, and I'll add some more dark to that, like it's accent colors. And I have some things going on below. And then back to the rigger, and we'll add the tree trunks for these silly looking little broomstick trees. Okay, so that's all there is to those trees. I can finish this off camera even, but I'm almost done already. So they're that fast. Okay. Oh, you don't get a trunk. Better give you one. Okay, so then let's go to, well, let's put in some of those grasses right back here, a little bit shorter. And I'm just using upward strokes with my rigger brush, adding those. And then we get into a field of long grasses. So I'm going to put down the base color with my flat brush. It's kind of a gray browny color. So I'll put in a base like this, filling it in really quite quickly. And then as we come to the front, there's some more of that, plus some greens and more things like that. So let me just fill in some up here, and then get a green, do some of this sort of thing. And in the background here, I'm looking for sort of an interesting wet on wet texture so that these colors will just mix together and fill it in. Okay, you don't want too many details all over the place or your painting starts to look really overworked. So in fiddly grassy areas like this, you're almost always going to be farther ahead to just kind of sweep over it. Just make sure you have enough darks so that there's something interesting there. A few contrasts. I'm going to work all the way down to this pond. And I've got several colors in here. I've got some yellows, I've got some browns, and I've got some greens. So I just want plenty of color on the brush so that those can mix together and do their thing. Get some more greens back here. Add some of those in the background there so it doesn't look like a mistake. And then for the water, you know, where the grasses are by the water here, I'm going to get a really dark green on my rigger brush and just pull through this wet color that's already wet. Here, let me make sure you can see what I'm doing. Okay. Good. I've got the brush I've got my board at an angle so that I have the most control possible. And then I'm just going to slice down, slice, slice, slice like this. And see how I'm going right through that wet color so that this doesn't look like it's different. Okay, I don't want bleeds. I just want it to look like a continuation. So here this grass is just going right over the water. One continuing line because I'm going to work quickly enough that this doesn't have time to dry. Knock on wood. And if it bleeds a little bit up here, I don't mind at all. It looks kind of cool. Okay, putting in plenty of those lines. But see how I'm going fast and I'm only doing one stroke per grass? That's really important. You can't make it look like it's all contrived and too fussed over. So you really have to sort of throw them in there and keep going on with it. Do some of these individual grasses up in the foreground here. And your strokes are going to go fat to thin depending on the direction. So they're going to start out fat and end up thin. So always stroke from that direction that you want. I hope that's clear. Put them in the direction of growth, and that way they'll look more realistic. That's what I'm trying to say. Make some of these go up on the bridgeway here. Back to my big brush. Drop in some more darks, because when we take off the masking fluid, those are just going to pop out. It's going to look fantastic. I want some more darks up here too. And since this is still wet, I just have to tap them in there, and they're going to bleed right in. Those contrasts are the key to making a really interesting piece. So don't go shy on contrasts. And I have that really dark color down, so I need to blend it in. I'm going to pull it down into some more of these grasses. See how I'm pulling it through and making these grass shapes? That's all you have to do. Then it's going to look really natural. I'm going to add some more dark right up here. And pull those down, some of them really carefully. Pull some of them up. Okay. Now we need to let that dry completely. Then all we have left is the pathway and the masking fluid that we need to take off. So after we take that off, there'll be a few places to patch up, but we are nearly there. All right, we're really quickly going to lay in a base color here for the walkway. So I'm just going to get a light brown, gray color mixed up here on my palette. And then it has lots of white in it. I've already left the ridgeway really light colored, and I've protected that with masking fluid, so I'm just going to wipe over the top. Just like this. And then after that's dry, I can remove the masking fluid. And there's a bare patch down here. Now I'm just going to fill in with more grasses. It's just just a little bit more green, and then carry that green into some of these other areas so it doesn't look so different. Then we're going to let that dry and come back and remove the masking fluid. Alright, that dried really quickly, so we're moving on, and we're going to take off that masking fluid. I have a rubber cement eraser that I like to use, and I just rub it right over the top. You can feel your paper, and that masking fluid is really easy to feel. I'm just going to take it all off, and then we'll be in the last stage of the painting. We're doing the cleanup work and finishing touches. Alright, that's everything. So that was easy. Now we're just going to go in with be using a rigger brush and that squirrel brush again, and I'm going to go over the top of those protected weeds because they're a little bit too bright. I'm just going to wash right over the top. This is with a yellowish tint that hopefully looks more like grass and will help them to blend in a bit better. And then I'm just going to show you what I'll be doing to finish up. So I'll be going over the lines of the walkway with that squirrel brush, trying to do it just one stroke per board. And then I'll be darkening up the board that is vertical. So if you look on the picture, ooh, right here it's dark and it gets lighter and lighter, and then these slats are all darker. So I'll need to go back and do that. You don't need to spend a really long time on this stuff, but I am going to go off camera to finish it up. So we don't want our film going too long. And then, oh, you know, there's going to be a little bit of touch up in that back fence and in this house. I need to add some shadow to one side. So down here I'll pull down some dark. Keep it broken, and then go in with a rigger brush and add some more grasses. And I also neglected to add a branch and a trunk on this tree right here, so I'll do that too. And then I can add some windows to this house. And some windows over here. And this is how it's just going to slowly come together. And And all I'm doing is paying close attention to the reference material and pulling out those little details as I see them on the sheet. One thing that's going to help though is to look for the negative shapes again. So in this fence back here, I don't need to actually draw the back rail. What I can do instead is put in the dark shape of the grasses behind the rail, like I see on the sheet on my reference, and then it's going to pop forward because of those negative shadow shapes. This sort of work. And then just continue that color in the background so that it's clear what this is. Alright, so just some small patches of some of that color of grass back here as well. And then the contrast gets less and less as you go back. So if you run out of paint on your brush, that is just perfect. That will be naturally getting lighter as you move into the background, just like you should. Okay. So let me go off camera, give this about 20 minutes of the detail work, and come back to you and show you how it finished up. Okay, here's the painting after I've added a few more little details, some contrasts here and there. So now we're ready to take the tape off and see what it would look like with a white mat. All right, very nice. So I'll pan in a little bit and you can see some of the details that I added in the grass and in the walkway here. Some work in the reflection. Yeah, it's a fun painting to do. It's one that I think you're really going to enjoy. And so this is definitely a painting that I think you'll enjoy trying at your own studio. Just for the best results, make sure that you lay out the lighthouse in these straight constructions with a ruler to make them nice and precise, and then do what I did with that sky and draw at least the main shapes of those clouds so that it will look the same above and below. But that's where I'm going to leave you for this month. I hope that you've learned some things in the tutorial that you can take away into your own studio. And of course, thank you for joining me for this painting tutorial. I hope to see you again next month.